to episode 5, part 3 of Jigsaws with Jamie. We're continuing the Great Britain puzzle, which you can see in the background over there. This time for this episode I've randomly selected one of the last two pieces, and we're going to be doing the upper left corner, which for those of you with good eyesight will see that it's actually covered by the I Love Great Britain logo. That doesn't appear in the puzzle, so there's a little bit of guesswork with this corner of the puzzle. If you're joining in, as usual, get yourself comfortable, get your puzzle set out, pause the video while you do that, and then we'll get ready to go. If you're just wanting to watch along, then again, get comfortable and we'll get started. As always, I've got the central pieces around the edge pieces slightly off camera, I suspect, today. On my right hand side, and just the one corner piece. You may hear it's raining rather incessantly outside. Hopefully that's not causing too much of a distraction. I suspect for some people you might find it rather comforting. Also got the dog somewhere in the house. We may have a distraction, may have a pause again from if the dog decides he wants to go out, which will probably involve me having to dry him quite excessively when he's back in. But anyway, without further ado, let's get started. So I'm going to start on the edges and finish up the heraldic flags, shields that are here, and then we're done with the heraldry. There's not as much this time; it doesn't go all the way around the top. As you might be able to see, it's just along the side, so it will help us down this edge anyway. As usual, before I forget, this week or this episode's recommended charity remains the Twaddle Trust, which runs food banks in the UK. If you are able to give something, especially this time of year, I know it can be very difficult for charities and trying to cope with demand. I'm sure it would be much appreciated if you are able to give anything. As usual, links are below. Right, so I'm already reaching my limits with these, excuse me, with these pieces. Oh no, there we go, we find another bit. As I say, my last puzzle, I still haven't gone out to find out anything more about heraldry. It's not something of interest at all really to me. Potentially someone might be able to offer their thoughts in the comments below. Hello, we're back there. Sorry, short interruption. Actually wasn't the dog or my wife on this occasion. I don't know if you could hear from where I was speaking. I was about to have a coughing fit. Just a bit of a sore throat. I didn't think you would appreciate having to listen to that. So just pause the video while I had a quick drink. So up at the top of this puzzle, there's a lot of aeroplanes. Some of them I recognise and should be able to tell you a little bit about, hopefully. Some of them I'm sure aeroplane enthusiasts will know a lot more about, but I don't count myself as one. This here, I'm just solving now, is part of an airship or a blimp, depending on where I think where in the world you are. Some places will call it an airship, some places will call it a dirigible, I believe, and a zeppelin if you're on the continent. The airship has some seagulls between it, which should help solve, but they seem to be not playing along quite as well as much as I would like, and that's because they go at the end there. The other part of the top here is Concorde. Concorde, for those of you that aren't aware, was a supersonic passenger jet built by the French and the British. would fly predominantly between London, Paris, and New York. Flew for quite some time, if I remember, a couple of decades, and then unfortunately had a rather terrible accident at Paris where it crashed shortly after takeoff, and I don't know the exact numbers, but I think everyone on board was killed. And it wasn't the very end for the plane, but there were other factors. It was quite expensive and cheap, but slightly slower planes planes that could carry more people, even if they were a bit slower, were the more popular choice. So I think the crash just kind of accelerated the end rather than was the cause of the end. But yeah, the Concorde doesn't fly anymore. You can find them in aviation museums. Never flew on one myself. I did have a friend who flew to New York on the Concorde, and as I said, obviously it was exciting, but quite cramped, quite uncomfortable, and didn't feel that it made a huge difference to the journey. Didn't arrive in New York feeling refreshed and ready to hit the city or anything like that. So I think a nice idea, but not necessarily what people were looking for. And I'm further along here, and I've got what looks like parts of a Lancaster bomber, I believe. So the Lancaster bomber was the main bombing aircraft in the Second World War. Main bombing aircraft, that's probably not the right. So it was the main bomber, would fly over Europe and drop instant bombs on targets, German targets. Lancaster, there's usually one involved in kind of flybys and parades and things. If anyone watched the Jubilee celebrations earlier on this year, obviously for the fallen Queen, I think a Lancaster bomber was involved there. I'd be almost certain it would be involved. So there's a few different planes, as I said, and unfortunately quite a few of them look very similar. So it's a case of just trying to work out where the planes go. So I think that goes there. They all look quite similar, and then obviously blue sky is very little help at all. It's plain blue sky, very little help in trying to fit the puzzle together. So I'm relying on targeting targeting the pieces that have other things to see first. So even if it's just a small scrap of a plane, it's easier to try and put the puzzle together. Now, I'm not sure that does go there. Now I've tried it, we'll hold it off for now. See if we can find any other bits that fit better. Like that piece there, and that makes me think that actually I'm not quite in the right place for this part. See if we can find any more bits of an aeroplane. That looks more like it, doesn't it? There we go. These look like Spitfires. As a non-plane expert, I'm going to say Spitfires, although one thing I do know is that while the Spitfire, which was a fighter plane, was kind of the golden poster boy of fighter planes in the war, in the Second World War. It was actually the Hurricane, which I mean, I'll be honest, I can't really tell a difference. They look very similar. But it was the Hurricane that did the majority of fighting. I think the Spitfires were a bit more complicated to make, so they relied a lot more heavily on the Hurricane, which was a bit more straightforward to make, cheaper, I suspect. So it was actually, the Spitfire has kind of all the glory, but it wasn't necessarily the primary fighter. Okay, now I suspect this piece goes here. This is one of the bits where I can't quite see behind the name, but I suspect that goes there. I think it's part of an airship. So I will leave that there for now. And we also have, I do recognise the logo of the Luftwaffe, which was obviously the German Air Force. So I suspect what we're seeing is parts of planes involved in a dogfight. So actually, I'll try and fit these together. So the main dogfighting during the war, the Second World War, actually took place fairly early on in the war. The German Air Force attempting to initially destroy RAF targets, and then changing their minds effectively and targeting London, our cities. London took one kind of the brunt, but there were other cities targeted as well. And what I'm led to believe is that decision, I think I know what's going on here. I've put this in the wrong place. I think that's why this isn't fitting right. Sorry. I think that decision to change tack and target kind of civilians was obviously extremely difficult for those civilians, but gave the RAF a breather, gave it some breathing room, which meant that it could, I was close, it was here, it meant that it could regroup and rebuild its defences. And had the Germans continued to target the RAF in quite the same way that they were initially, the Battle of Britain, as it became known, might not have ended quite the way it did, with a fairly resounding British victory. So that's the bit I do know about Battle of Britain history. I'm conscious that there are lots of planes to get building, but I'm also struggling a little bit to kind of put them together, so I might just have a look a little bit further down. There's a few other things going on, say London bus that stands out quite nicely because it's red. There's a bit of the shield which I hadn't found earlier. Is that more of the bus? It does look, yes, there's more of the bus on this side here. There should be another bit of bus. I mean, there's an obvious red bit there, but I think I know what that is, and that's not it. I'll come to that soon. And there should be kind of a corner of the bus that is escaping me. Now, I'll keep going on, I think, and see if it, there it is, it's appeared. Now, we also have parts of a train running, and these look like a kind of intercity train, fairly ubiquitous train in the UK. Again, train spotters, train lovers may well be able to tell us what exact train this is. I'm afraid I'm not quite that much of a fan. So I'm going to have to just call it an intercity train, and that it goes between cities. That's where the name comes from. I don't think it's too much of a conundrum as to where the name comes from. But again, struggling to find the bits of the train. When I did this puzzle, when I was trying it out, the train stood out quite a bit. It's got, if you can see, kind of a white, red and blue. I found a few, I can see a few pieces now actually. That's the bit I was looking for there. It goes kind of behind the buildings, so you don't get the full length of the train on the puzzle, but you certainly get bits of it. And if I can find enough bits and put them together, we might make some progress. If I get it the right way up as well. And that looks like the back of the train, which is useful. We'll keep on this bit. I think part of it is it's straight lines. There's obviously a train is effectively straight lines, and straight lines stand out on a puzzle like this where there's a lot going on. So if I can, like so, find the straight lines, then we get a train. And we also get the top of, or the beginnings of the top of what I think is supposed to be a Nelson's column. I think I may have mentioned it in previous videos. We had kind of the bottom of Nelson's column, and instead of Nelson, who is going to make an appearance, so I won't talk about him too much just yet. Instead of Nelson at the top of Nelson's column, we actually have a lion, a golden lion. So if anyone's been to Trafalgar Square in London, to Nelson's column, lions do feature fairly heavily. They are they have lion statues at the base, or 3 statues on 3 pedestals. There's a 4th pedestal which will typically have a rotating piece of art, so it'll be some piece of artwork that will change from time to time. So the last time I went to London, it was a giant bowl of kind of whipped cream or ice cream with a cherry on top, and I've had all sorts. I think artists can kind of apply to have their work exhibited, and it will include it has included people actually sitting on top of the pedestal as well, and being kind of a living artwork. Okay, so we do actually have a character appearing down here, which is, I think, Charlie Chaplin supposed to be. It's obviously a fairly famous movie star from the kind of early days of film when it was silent movies. Probably a shame to say I don't think I've ever actually seen any of his films. Not really my cup of tea. I've seen clips, you know. I'm sure we've all seen clips on documentaries or on YouTube or whatever. So yeah, I get the idea of how his films went, but certainly not something I'd sit down and watch the whole thing, or purposefully sit down to watch a Chaplin film. Again, we also seems to be missing half of his body, which could be anywhere in this puzzle. I might change tack again slightly. I've got a few bits that are fitting together in the middle, upper middle, with this train. But I'm also conscious that, hold on, so having said that, the piece just appeared obvious to me. Conscious that I don't want to get bogged down trying to search for pieces that might not be here. And like I said, the train isn't continuous, so I need to be careful that I'm not trying to fit pieces together that don't fit. What I am going to do is create a face of someone who is fairly obvious, and I don't think there'll be any arguments as to who this is. This is William Shakespeare, a famous playwright. He's kind of sitting in the middle somewhere, so parts of him stand out quite nicely. I'm busy writing a play, and there's other kind of documents all being scattered around, which I think are meant to represent his plays as he's kind of churning them out. So yes, famous playwright, Elizabethan playwright. Kind of spoken about him before. Spoken about kind of conspiracy theories that surround him. I'm sure you've all either heard of or studied a Shakespearean play, or you certainly be able to name a few. Maybe kind of at school it was compulsory for us. I'm sure for most people whose schooling is in English, because they are a huge part of the English language. Obviously, he was involved in kind of creating tens of thousands of words, if I remember rightly. It's certainly a sizable number of English words. But I think slightly unfairly often is a bit maligned because people have to study him, and whenever you have to study something, it takes some of the fun out of it, doesn't it? Or it's in danger of taking some of the fun out of it. And I think a lot of people put off things like plays and Shakespeare and the like because of that, which is a shame, because some of his work is, well, I think everyone would say all of his work is brilliant, but certainly some of the stuff I really enjoy. And I think I said before, it's better when it's performed. For me, his plays need to be performed to truly appreciate them. Sitting like we did, reading them in a book, just doesn't really have the same impact. There's another character appearing down here. The red hat that I mentioned earlier has made an appearance, and it's Tommy Cooper. So Tommy Cooper, for those of you who haven't come across him before, is he's unfortunately died now. He was a British comedian stroke magician. He did, and general variety performer really, not just the comedy was certainly his big thing. And he performed jokes, often quite daft jokes, nothing too serious. And he'd do magic again, and the magic tricks would usually appear to be failing, and on some occasions did fail, whether that was intentional or not. It's always hard to work out with Tommy Cooper. And part of the gag was that he was actually a very competent magician, I believe, but would kind of fail and get laughs out of that and try and work out what's gone wrong and why it didn't work. I think if I remember rightly, died on stage, or became very ill on stage, kind of collapsed, and was rushed to hospital, and there was nothing that could be done really. It was he was not a young man, and I think it was the end of Tommy Cooper. So again, you can still see his stuff online if you're interested, if you've never seen him before. again, usually quite will crack you up. Fairly light-hearted humour, nothing too serious about it. But he stands out quite nicely in this puzzle, which helps me enormously. And the other, so I think this is actually going a lot lower than I've got it at the moment. The other person, I've got the top of the head of Eric Morecambe, who we did definitely speak about in a previous puzzle, so I'm not going to talk about him again. But if you want to find out more about him, I think he appeared in part 1 of this episode. So if you want to find out more about Eric Morecambe, you need to head back to part 1. Obviously, I would recommend, if you've not listened to part 1, anyway, you should give it a listen. I have meant to say that these, I've not really said it explicitly, but these parts are standalone. You know, you don't have to have seen parts 1, 2, and now 3. You can certainly watch them separately. But obviously, it probably makes a bit more sense if you've seen all of them as we've gone along. Because I do tend to remember what I was talking about, or try to remember what I was talking about in previous episodes, and kind of refer back. A lot of these pieces kind of interlink, so. But if you're just wanting to enjoy this particular episode, you are obviously welcome, and hopefully you'll get something out of it. Whether that's deciding to go and listen to some other parts, or whether that's just enjoying this episode, is entirely up to you. Okay, so Shakespeare does appear to be a bit too high, or I've had him a bit too high. I think he does sit down here. There's another face that keeps jumping out at me that I'm gonna have to solve. Although having said that, I think I've seen another bit of Shakespeare. There we go. No, yes, that's the wrong way around. But there's another part to Shakespeare that we've got in. The other face that's jumping out at me, or two faces, and we'll do this one as Elton John is the first. Obviously famous rock star musician. Probably doesn't need any kind of introduction. My dad's quite a fan, I think, of his work. He's the kind of guy similar to kind of other musician. When we're talking about the Beatles, I can name some of his songs and certainly sing along with quite a few of his songs. I don't think I'd call myself an Elton John fan, though. I'm certainly not gonna be kind of going out buying albums and things like that. For the purposes of this puzzle, I am a bit of a fan because he stands out quite nicely and he's quite large. You won't be able to see him on the box. He's one of the characters who is hidden in the box. So he is somewhere here. And I think he's actually quite a bit higher up again. So I think we might. Yes, that does fit there. So like I said, he's quite a useful character to try and get in. And colour-wise, he stands out a lot. He's wearing pink with kind of musical keys denoted on his jacket, so that stands out. The other character who stands out is the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. So Tony Blair was the Prime Minister through quite a large part of my childhood. He came to power in 1997 and was in power until 2007 when he handed over to his Chancellor, Gordon Brown, who went on to be the second Labour Prime Minister of that period. Obviously, again, I don't think Tony Blair probably needs much introduction. Most people will hear of him. I think his inclusion in this puzzle may be a bit controversial. I think, as I've said before, this puzzle was kind of I think I've said before, maybe I didn't, but I did find in this puzzle a catalogue for other puzzles, and it was dated 2009. So I'm assuming, you shouldn't assume anything, but I am assuming that that means that this puzzle was made in, well, before 2009. Clearly, it must have been made before 2009, but I'm assuming kind of around that time. So Tony Blair will have either been the Prime Minister at the time it was made or just handed over when this was designed. And there was this whole deal about Cool Britannia, which was a bit more at the end of the 90s. It certainly seems to have tapered off by 2009, but I suspect part of the reason he's included is because it was very much, he was not a driving force behind that, but it was partly because he became the Prime Minister that a lot of the kind of Cool Britannia stuff came about. He was felt to be a part of that, and I think that is why he's included, because very recent history. Having said that, he was Prime Minister for a long time. 10 years is a long time in British politics, especially at the moment. I'm going to talk about politics, I'm going to try and avoid it, but certainly 10 years would be gobsmacking for some of our recent Prime Ministers. So yeah, kind of an important figure, and controversial, obviously. But I think there were positives to his premiership. I'm sure that might lose me a few followers, or get me a few comments saying that, because I know it's not a cool thing to say. But there were positives. Having said that, I do also feel like he didn't go far enough in reforming the way the country runs. If he had done, I don't think we'd have necessarily ended up with the mess that we've had since he was in office. But yeah, his inclusion here, I'm inclined to just accept it, nod and accept it. I think if you were to make this Jigsaw nowadays, a decade or so down the line, I suspect he might not make the cut, but he did. And like I said, this puzzle was probably made, well, it was made before 2009, because it had the calendar in, not the calendar, the brochure. So let's see who else we can see. There is another character. There's a couple of characters that do stand out. So one of them here is Florence Nightingale. So Florence Nightingale, if you have anything to do with nursing, you probably know about Florence, or anything to do with healthcare. Florence Nightingale was a nurse during the Crimean War, who revolutionised the way nursing ran, with a lot of the time very simple things, looking at statistics, looking at data and working out why people were dying, and then really simple things like cleanliness and hygiene, and all the things we sort of take for granted in modern healthcare. She very much championed that, and is, I think, rightly so credited with saving a lot of lives. The Crimean War, more people died, more soldiers died from infections than fighting. So she kind of really revolutionised that kind of field of nursing, and I think, you know, is still kind of credited. There are other people that maybe should get more prevalence. There's a woman called Mary Seacole, the conspiracy-minded, or maybe not necessarily conspiracy-minded, although we'll point out that Mary Seacole was black, and that's why, you know, Florence Nightingale was a white woman and Mary Seacole was a black woman, and that's why she gets less attention. And I'm sure there is an element of that involved. So Mary Seacole was similar, was kind of a nurse in the Crimean War and did a lot for changing nursing. We actually have, so I was working in the NHS in healthcare, and there is actually a leadership programme named after Mary Seacole, the Mary Seacole programme. So she does, certainly in healthcare circles, will get some recognition. Maybe not so much in the kind of general consciousness, but certainly in healthcare she will be recognised for what she did. We're making some progress on getting this part of the puzzle completed. Yeah, it should be fairly straightforward to get all of these windows complete, because they are quite straight, in lots of straight lines, but it's not the easiest. It's the top of William Shakespeare's head. That's been annoying me for a little while, but we've got that now. What is annoying me is where is the other side of Charlie Chaplin's face. But anyway, I think I might have to do the last big face that stands. There's Charlie Chaplin's face, just as I said, that has appeared. But I might have to do the last big face that stands out in this part of the puzzle, and that is Horatio Nelson, of Nelson's Column fame. Mentioned him earlier. So there's a few pieces of Nelson which I just need to work out how they all go together. Yeah, Nelson was a British admiral in the Royal Navy, fighting against Napoleon during the Napoleonic Wars, and famously at the Battle of Trafalgar won a kind of decisive victory, but it was killed in the process. He was shot. There's a few stories about Nelson. I don't know whether this was at Trafalgar or at the Battle of the Nile, which was another kind of big battle he was involved in, but he apparently was given orders to retreat or to not engage or whatever the orders were, and he had a false eye from a previous injury, and he was supposed to have put his telescope where he was looking through to read the orders. He famously put it to his bad eye so that he couldn't read it, and then went on and attacked. It could be apocryphal. Don't know if that's genuinely true. There's quite a few stories. There's other things about Nelson. So he was killed, as I said, at the Battle of Trafalgar. They went on to win the battle, and I think his last words were something along the lines of "Kismet," which lots and lots of people to this day debate what on the earth that meant. Kismet, Kismet, I think is the kind of the spelling that people use. There's a few theories. He was talking to his kind of second in command. Was he giving him a message? Was he saying "kiss me"? He was dying. Wanted to show his affection for his second in command. Who knows? Lots of theories. The other thing I know about Nelson, although I'm talking about him, but I'm actually solving the puzzle down at the bottom here. The other thing that I believe his heart. He wanted to be buried in London or back in England, and they couldn't have a dead body on the ship for long periods of time for hygiene reasons and things, and they didn't have room to pickle him. And I literally mean pickle, in vinegar or whatever. So they cut out his heart, I think, and pickled his heart instead. And brought that back to London, so his heart was brought back, but not the rest of him, I think, is the story. So yeah, obviously a famous victory. Yeah, I think he was on board HMS Victory as well, which was the name of his ship, just to really rub it in. It's a really kind of famous battle, famous victory, and Nelson's column, which is a kind of really tall column with his statue on top, is in central London, and it's in a place called Trafalgar Square. So those of you that are not from the UK or not visited the UK, so you can see Trafalgar, go to Trafalgar Square and see a memorial to Nelson. Okay, so it feels like we're making some progress. There's still little bits of this puzzle that are holding out. The other thing I would say is as I said, that another piece slides in. I think we're getting close to all of the characters. There's still some planes, which I can pretend like I know what I'm talking about. There we go. This isn't a plane. I've just realised what it is. The piece I've just put in here, I can't see the second part yet. The last part of it yet. But I think that's meant to be a V2 rocket, which was a German rocket that was fired over London, and that's it. There we go. It is a V2. No, that's a V1. A V1 rocket, which was fired during the war, towards the end of the war. Kind of rocketry. The Germans were certainly most advanced when it came to kind of rocketry, and the V1 and then the V2 were kind of effectively terror weapons to fire at people, in the hope that would help win the war. I think it was too little, too late. The war was already lost, but it obviously terrified a lot of people and killed not a huge number of people, I don't think, but killed, any number more than zero is too many people killed, obviously. I think the biggest issue, obviously, you couldn't get warnings. These weapons would kind of almost evade radar, and you didn't necessarily have the kind of the air raid warnings and things. So the first thing you might know about the V2 is when it lands on top of you. And I would imagine that's something similar to what people in places like Ukraine are experiencing. If a rocket's moving fast enough, certainly if it's moving faster than the speed of sound, you ain't going to know about it until it's too late. And I suspect that caused more fear than kind of standard plane air raids at the time, where you could hear the plane coming and you had the warning sirens, and they if you look at the numbers, they'll have killed a lot more people, I'm sure, but less terrifying, because there's things you could do about that. You could get to an air raid shelter, try and hide. So yeah, too little too late for the Germans, which is probably good for the rest of us, because it I might not win, as they always say. Would we be sat here having these conversations if Germany had won the war? Who knows? But it was very good for NASA, because the Americans were particularly aggressive at capturing German rocketeers at the end of the war, and a guy in particular, Werner von Braun, who was kind of leading the German rocket program, and he was kind of snatched up and effectively given a pardon the right word, or his involvement in any dodgy or kind of Nazi atrocities were sort of forgotten, so that he could be involved in helping the Americans build up their rocket program. And I'm sure that will have involved ballistic missiles, weapons, but it also involved being involved in the founding of NASA. Now, NASA is kind of an extremely noble goal, I think, personally, for rockets and that end, exploring, and so there were positives that came out of the end of the war. Von Braun and the other rocketeers that came with him effectively were forgiven. Is forgiven the right word? And forgiven of their any involvement they had in Nazi atrocities. I don't think, from what I know of Von Braun, I don't think he was, heavily involved in kind of Nazi atrocities. I think he will have almost certainly have used slave labour, because that was, the cheap labour. It was the way you got your rockets built. So I'm sure he was involved in the kind of from that point of view. So I guess how much do you consider him accountable? But the Cold War was heating up, just getting going, and the Americans needed rockets, or wanted rockets, and that meant that other things were forgotten. Probably not by the people that suffered, but certainly by the Americans. Okay, on to something a bit more cheerful, shall we? So down here, I think we've got the Channel Tunnel. Channel Tunnel opened in the 90s, runs between the UK and France. Train tunnel, extremely useful if you don't want to fly, but still want to have a trip over to the continent. You can get to Paris and now places like Amsterdam and Brussels, kind of big destinations. I have been on the Channel, as it was called, or the Channel Tunnel twice. Once when I was at school, and we went to Aachen in Germany, and we drove down on a coach to Kent, Felixstowe, I believe, in Kent, and then picked up a train there, then across to Calais, and then drove from Calais to Aachen. And then the second time was just before the pandemic. With my wife, we went to Brussels, and in that case, we got the train down to London, and then got the Eurostar, which is the trains that run across from London. So we picked up the Eurostar into London, and certainly convenient if you don't like flying. Obviously, that's really convenient. But it's part of it still felt like the flying experience. You still got to go through customs, and there was a delay, and then two trains got put together. The last time I used it, two trains were one train was cancelled, and they stuck two of them together. So yeah, I'm just finishing a slightly odd part of this puzzle. Again, you can't see it on the box. It's a man in a shed appearing to fly through the sky, and I had absolutely no idea what this was referring to when I first did the puzzle. isn't until you are very careful to read the caption just on the shed where it says the Great Storm 1987. So for American listeners, if there's any American listeners out there, you probably balk at this. Excuse me, I'm probably just going to have another drink before I start coughing. Okay, and we're back. It seems to be me that's distracting everyone this time with the interruptions, but I just keep feeling like I'm going to cough. I certainly don't want to be doing that for you on camera. Anyway, we'll see how we get on. We're doing okay. We might make it to the end. So yeah, I was just about to say, we were talking about the Great Storm of 1987. I was just saying, I think American listeners are probably going to be rather bemused, but there was a storm in 1987, by coincidence the year I was born, which technically was a hurricane. Well, I think compared to some of the hurricanes that you get in kind of the Caribbean and southern US, it was not the most ferocious, and it's quite famous or kind of infamous for a weather presenter called Michael Fish, who obviously brilliantly named to start with, Michael Fish, but he was kind of presenting the weather, and it was back in the day where the internet obviously didn't really exist, or certainly wasn't readily accessible. People would use phones a lot more than they do nowadays. Ring up, and someone rang into. He worked for the BBC, I think, and rang into the BBC to say, "I've heard." Don't know where they'd heard this from, because news sources were limited, but they'd heard that there was a hurricane on the way, and wanted to kind of ask what to do. And Michael Fish famously or infamously sort of replied, "Don't be silly, there isn't a hurricane on the way. Don't know where you heard this rubbish, everything's going to be fine." And obviously later that night there was a significant storm. Whether it quite meets the definition of a hurricane, I know wind speeds have to be a certain wind speed and things for it to be officially a hurricane, but certainly it was bad enough that a lot of damage was done. Obviously, kind of the UK is not always set up to deal with kind of significant wind. I know a lot of places aren't set up to deal with kind of hurricane force winds and the like, but certainly wasn't set up to deal with the wind. And it was, I think the other thing about it was fairly early in the year, so I think a lot of leaves, like trees, still had leaves on, which might not sound very much, sound significant, but when it comes to storms, that can be very significant, because if they've still got their leafage that hasn't fallen, it gives more purchase for the wind to kind of get hold of and whip up, and so you're more likely to pull trees down. So storms in winter, when most trees have lost their leaves, are not necessarily as bad, even though they can be more powerful sometimes. They don't necessarily cause as much damage because the trees, kind of the wind passes through the bare branches but easier. So this storm was fairly early in the year, and there's still a lot of leaf cover, and I think a lot of trees were downed, and I don't know, I'm assuming people died. Obviously a lot of damage was done to people's homes and kind of, you know, power outages and all the usual stuff you get with a storm. But I do assume people died as a result as well, which obviously makes things worse. So yeah, Michael Fish became a bit of a joke, not a joke, but you know, certainly a bit of the butt of jokes. Because he partly with his kind of confidence that, you know, there is no storm coming, don't worry. Unless you are absolutely 100% confident, it's something, you know, it's probably best to always show a degree of humility. Hopefully I do with these videos. If you know, I'm not claiming that that I know the facts 100%, so I'll always kind of temper what I'm saying. And if I do slip up, or if I spot it when I'm editing, I will try and put a comment below, pin a comment for you. If you spot anything, please do let me know, because that way we all learn. We all learn together. Again, these videos are not about learning. They're not here. You know, you're not here to study and learn necessarily. I hope you do potentially learn something from what we talk about. But it is always good to be accurate as well. So if you do spot any errors, let me know. Okay, we are clearly coming towards the end of this puzzle now. There's a biplane appearing here. I don't know the significance of the biplane. Obviously, biplanes more commonly involved in the First World War than the Second. I assume this maybe is a particular style of biplane. White Cliffs of Dover, quite a famous natural landmark in the UK. If you've ever been, it's actually somewhere I never have been. I've never been to kind of Dover to see the White Cliffs. Maybe look at it's quite a distance from where I live. Realistically, it need to drive probably, and it's a fair few hours on the road. Just today, come back from a holiday, for a few days away with my wife. We drove for kind of 3 hours if we hadn't stopped for breaks, and might not sound much to some people when it comes to driving who do a lot more, but for me that was enough. I'm not looking to be going any further by car, not in the near future anyway. So yeah, went to the Cotswolds. If anyone's kind of been following on social media, you might have seen a couple of posts. Didn't post a huge amount, partly because we didn't do a huge amount, kind of intentionally really. We had a very relaxing couple of days. We rented a little cottage. We kind of went for gentle walks into the local area, ate some good food, and watched some films and sat by the fire and read, and that was it really. And it was great. Certainly very, very relaxing. Okay, so it feels like this puzzle should be starting to come together now. And it feels like we're just on the last remnants here, because it is all falling into place. It's always these last little bits that just add that little bit of challenge. Just don't seem to fit anywhere. What have we got there? I think that's going to go down here, isn't it? This is the Spitfire here. Maybe when I was talking earlier about the planes over here somewhere, maybe there were hurricanes up here. So there. Spitfire Jokers, they do look very similar. Again, if you are an aviation enthusiast, let us know below which one's which, if you can tell from this picture. I'll obviously post at the end as usual, so you can have a look at more detail if you are interested. No, that doesn't fit there, so I'm trying to bash it in together. It does fit there. I think these are these planes. This plane appearing here, I think, is a Harrier jump jet. So Harrier jump jets were a vertical takeoff plane. I think the first successful vertical takeoff plane, which obviously makes it a lot easier to take off from ships. I'm kind of involved in the Falklands War. Although not called the Falklands War if you live in Argentina, obviously. I think it's the War of Independence they call it. They certainly call the islands the Malvinas. I'm going to have to call it the Falklands War because that's just what I was brought up with it being called. I live in the UK. I can appreciate that there's an element of bias in there, but that's just what I grew up with it being called. Okay, we are nearly there. That, I think, is a Comet, which was the UK's first jet fighter, I think. I think that's what it's supposed to be. And that is the end of the German plane that's crashing, and that is the final piece in there. Excellent. So, that's part 3 of the puzzle completed. We've now got top left and both bottom corners done. We have one more corner to complete, which is the top right, and hopefully that will be coming to you soon. As usual, thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this puzzle. If you've got any questions, drop them in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you next time.